Blessings, good evening. Tonight is Tuesday night, so we have some questions come in. A good opportunity to have a short discussion on the Dhamma by asking questions, answering them, see what we can do. The first question is, Lompo, if there is no God or gods needed for us to experience enlightenment, and it is not handed down to us by a guru, what role does a teacher play in Buddhism? Well, you probably may have heard of this comment the Buddha made to Venerable Ananda, who was walking along next to the Buddha once, and said, the concept or the idea of Kalyana Mitta. Kalyana Mitta means the noble friend, the good friend or guide in the Dhamma. He said Kalyana Mitta are so important, I think it's at least half of the holy life, meaning half, 50% of the holy life. It's that important. But the Buddha said, no, don't say that, Ananda. Kalyana Mitta are 100% of the holy life. So all of the holy life, having Kalyana Mitta, people who have practiced ahead of you, who are skilled and knowledgeable in the practice, who have wisdom and compassion and help to guide you both by example and by advice and teaching. It's the whole of the holy life. So, something to reflect on. It's true. The Buddhist teachings are based on the principle of karma. So we are cultivating the Noble Eightfold Path, as we just chanted, making good karma and abandoning bad karma. That's about, that means cause and effect, doesn't it? Cause and result. Good karma is a cause, and the results of good karma are progress in the Dhamma. The arising of wholesome states of mind, clarity, sila, samadhi, panya, wisdom, knowledge and vision into the way things are, which frees the mind from craving and attachment, and ultimately frees the mind from ignorance, which is the source of suffering. So the Buddhist teaching and practice based on the idea of karma, cause and effect. It's through skillful action that we can free our mind from suffering, free ourselves from suffering. It's not through praying to a god, asking for a god or gods to bless us. It's not through the blessing or transmission from a guru that we will realize the Dhamma. It's through our own efforts in the practice, cultivating the path. But that path has to be passed on to us by a teacher. So a teacher does play a role. They show us the way, they teach us, they guide us by example. It has to be a teacher who has practiced and realized somewhat the path for themselves, so that what they teach is coming from experience. It is possible for a teacher to be unenlightened, not fully enlightened, but very knowledgeable in the texts and in the path, and pass that on to their student, and the student becomes enlightened before them. While they're still unenlightened, the teacher can, by passing on the words of the Buddha, enlighten someone else. They'd still have to be a very skilled teacher, knowledgeable and effective teacher, understanding the person they're talking to, what they need to hear to help them realize the Four Noble Truths. There are even those teachers who have become enlightened during the time they are teaching others. But the Buddha said it's necessary to have Kalyana Mitta. There's the two main factors that one's wisdom faculty develops through the way we develop sammaditthi, right view. One is hearing the true Dhamma from those who have practiced it and realized it, and then through our own internal wise reflection on the Dhamma teaching that we've heard, and on the truth that we're experiencing, reflecting on it to come to understand it in light of the Four Noble Truths. These two factors are essential. So we need teachers, but we also need to practice ourselves. We need both. Another question. Why did Ajahn Chah not talk about invisible beings such as ghosts and devas, and why didn't he mention much about states of samadhi and levels of jhana, etc., when some other teachers do talk about these things much more? Well, I think most people feel that Luang Por Chah was teaching things that were of real benefit and practically useful for the listener. So he tended to talk about the way of practice, but sharing in his own experience, so that it was very relatable, and he could talk about how he had identified his own mental defilements and then shared his own experiences, how to abandon them, and then sometimes talked about other people's practice and how they've practiced dealing with defilements and abandoned them. Sometimes he'd quote from the Buddha. Sometimes he'd talk a little bit more theoretically. Sometimes he just talked in a very practical, down-to-earth way. So he had a variety of styles, I think, in the way he talked. But he taught the Dhamma, he talked about things that we can verify and know for ourselves very easily and through our own practice. Thing is, when you start talking about invisible beings, ghosts and devas, well, they're invisible to the normal person. You don't see these beings. They're mentioned by the Buddha, they're mentioned by some teachers, of course. And Ajahn Chah didn't deny the existence of beings in other realms. But when you can't see something, there's a gap there in your personal experience. Somebody else could say, oh, there's a ghost, and you don't see it, so you don't know, and you don't know whether that person is telling the truth or lying or deluded. There's a problem there, because if you can't see something, you can't verify it. So in terms of dealing with your own mental defilements, maybe it's of limited use. People find it inspiring sometimes to hear these stories, just in the same way they find it exciting to watch Hollywood movies where people fly through the air and have superpowers. We love to hear stories of psychic powers, psychic ability, beings in other realms. But that's perhaps, we're showing us, what are you looking for with those stories and those recollections? It's maybe the excitement, the stimulation, inspiration, more than your direct wisdom or applicable wisdom that will help you to practice in your daily life to recognize defilement and abandon it. And there's always a chance of us hearing stuff, misinterpreting it, over-attaching to it, getting deluded by it, or then following if a teacher talks a lot about these things that you can't really verify or know very easily, then we may feel that's the way we have to look at the Dhamma as well. We want to see these things. So instead of meditating to see our mind and see defilement and abandon defilement, we're meditating to see beings in other realms, to see ghosts, see devas. Also, it can become self-aggrandizement. The teacher says, well, I saw this, I saw that, and then everyone says, well, the teacher's so special. And Ajahn Chah was a very, very clearly not doing that. Everyone who lived with him knew him, felt he was a very special person, had many special qualities and knowledges, but he was also very humble, not conceited. He displayed this lack of self, lack of conceit, arrogance or ego in his daily life all the time. He could be very ordinary, and he would use that phrase to describe himself. He'd say, I'm just ordinary. So even though he was a teacher with thousands of disciples, both monks, nuns and lay people, he didn't come across as somebody who was seeking everyone's attention or praise or he didn't have airs of grandeur. He was also very ordinary, down to earth, and he would still keep the rules of the monk just like every other monk. He would, go on alms round. He would sweep the leaves of the monastery. He would wear his robes the same. He'd meditate, come to meetings and chant and do work with the other monks. There was an ordinariness about him which made him very relatable. Obviously he was a very kind, friendly monk as well, but he taught in a way that anyone could appreciate. He didn't feel he needed to use stories about these, beings in other realms and devas. Most people believed he had psychic powers, and many people felt that he actually showed them his psychic powers by teaching things that seemed to be in their mind, talking about things that they were thinking about or problems they were facing internally that they hadn't articulated, but he would seem to pick up on it and talk about it. He would talk about events that happened in the monastery where he wasn't actually present, but it seemed to be that he knew about things that were going on. So many people had their personal stories and recollections of how Ajahn Chah seemed to display psychic powers and know what was going on and know what people were thinking. But he didn't really talk about that, so you don't see it or read about it in the books or on the tapes, the recorded teachings. But it's not that he never mentioned these things. He did sometimes talk about the factors of samadhi, the factors of jhana, fourth jhana, rupa jhana, arupa jhana. It's not that he didn't know the text and he didn't know these, and we believe he probably did know these, had these experiences for himself. We believe he's very skilled in samadhi, but and occasionally he would talk about it, but not much. He'd also be very honest and say, people love to hear about jhana, but they don't know how to clean the toilets. And he'd say, you go to a monastery where there are people who meditate, you want to know how well they're meditating, go and look at the toilets. If the toilets are clean, then they're probably mindful, disciplined enough in their practice. That's a good sign. If the toilets are clean, well, maybe their mind is clean and they're meditating well as well. If you go somewhere and the toilets are all messy and unkept, well, that's a sign maybe the minds of the people in that place are unkept and messy. And he'd say, no need to talk so much about jhana, just practice mindfulness in daily life. And he'd use very simple, ordinary reflections. So he'd say, you don't need to know the level of samadhi you're experiencing, but just know, am I peaceful or not? Which is still pointing to the fact you need to cultivate peaceful, wholesome states of mind where you're going beyond the 5 hindrances. But he wouldn't encourage people to get attached to the labels. Labels such as this level of samadhi, that level of attainment, that level of insight. Because I think he knew the dangers of it, and especially when you have a lot of students, then you might get a lot of competition. I've attained this more than that person, I'm better than them, worse than them. The conceit, self-view that comes up based around these labels is considerable, and I think he knew that could delude people if he's giving out these labels all the time or emphasizing them all the time, like we find in the books, in the texts. Obviously they do have the labels and the structure of the Dhamma, and people can become very obsessed and attached with that. So he taught more about the principles of good practice, and get you to reflect, is your mind peaceful or not? If it's not peaceful, well, what's coming up? How can you let go of that, overcome that? If you are peaceful, can you maintain it? So he'd also say, it's one thing to attain a level of samadhi through your meditation. It's even harder to maintain it, keep it, and repeat it over and over again. Most people will have a story of when they attained a deep state of samadhi or meditation, peace of meditation. They'll remember that. But whether they are doing that regularly or not is a different question. So he tended to come from the place of wisdom in his teachings and give people right view, but he wouldn't deny the existence of beings in other realms or these levels of samadhi or the existence of people with psychic powers. He just didn't emphasize them because they're not the most important part of the practice. But perhaps in private he would talk a bit more about those sort of things. Some monks who did live with him did discuss them with him, but in a more private situation. And when talking to the general population, whether it's Sangha or lay people, then he tended to talk more about the Noble Eightfold Path, Four Noble Truths, and then giving wise reflection on how to understand and apply those teachings in daily life. So he's always talking about defilements, his own battles with defilement, other people's battles, how defilement arise, how they can be abandoned, in many, many different ways. Because I think he found that more useful. And there are many teachers similar to Ajahn Chah, like Ajahn Buddhadasa, very similar. He didn't emphasize talking about beings in other realms, hell realms, heaven realms, levels of samadhi. And it wasn't that he didn't know the Buddhist texts or even that he didn't know these experiences. We, like Ajahn Chah, we believe he did have a personal experience of psychic powers, levels of jhana and so on. It's just he didn't talk that much about it because I think he found it wasn't that useful to help in helping people, and it could actually be counterproductive. It's a bit like say you're at a university. At university you have people who have finished a bachelor's degree, honours degree, master's degree, some will have done a doctorate, some will be associate professors, some will be professors, some will just be doctors, some will just be lecturers. There's all kinds of people with different levels of knowledge and skill, and you may occasionally come across their title and what they've done and read their book or whatever, but people don't generally walk around with a label on their lapel saying, I am the professor. I guess there may always be one or two like that, but generally you're not emphasizing the title and all the sort of the thesis that they've written is more, the daily interaction, the tutorials, the lectures, what they're teaching. That's more important. The information they're passing on and the discussions and so on. And Dhamma is the same. You don't need a lot of labels there for you to reassure you, oh, I've got my samadhi, oh, I'm a sotapanna. And Ajahn Chah would talk in this way. Someone, there's that story, the nun who thought she was a sotapanna and wanted confirmation from the teacher, went to him and she said, I'm a sotapanna. And he said, good. It's a little bit better than a dog. It's the self that wants the labels, the confirmations, the attention, but we're practicing to let go of the self and see through it. So I think he didn't teach in a way that would, boost the self. He'd teach in ways that would help reduce the self and help us see it and let go. Another question. Paul, why do Buddhist monks have to stay under the guidance of their teacher for the first 5 years of their time? Well, this is from the Vinaya, the monk's discipline that the Buddha gave out. I think the original monks in the time of the Buddha, they didn't go through an ordination procedure or stay with their teacher for 5 years. The original monks, the Buddha just invited them to come and practice for the end of suffering. They call it Ehi Bhikkhu Prasampada. He just said, come Bhikkhu. So he just declared, you're a Bhikkhu, because they were very advanced in their practice. You'd hear maybe just one talk or practice for a short period of time and already become enlightened. So there was relatively little formal training because they were so wise, peaceful, their sila and discipline was so good that they didn't need much. But over time, as the Sangha grew, you got monks and later got bhikkhunis and then lay men, lay women practicing. The amount of structure increased, the number of rules increased. And a whole system of training, we call it the bhikkhu system of training, was developed in the lifetime of the Buddha. So it became the norm by the time the Buddha passed away. It became the norm that a new monk stays with the teacher. That's either the preceptor, the upajjhaya, who generally has to have at least 10 reigns, or 10 years of experience, or teacher, who often is going to be what we call a thera, a monk who's been a monk at least 10 years, or maybe many more than that. Because just like in any profession, career, trade, you tend to want to be with your master, your teacher, for a long period of time to learn your craft, learn what you need to learn. And the same for a Buddhist monk. When you're brand new to the practice, you don't know anything. You put on the robes, but your mind is maybe still thinking like a layperson. Maybe you haven't developed much samadhi or mindfulness or insight. Maybe your training in the sila, in the monk's discipline, is very basic, and you're forgetting rules and you don't really know and understand how to practice in all situations. So you have to learn. And it's that period of learning that is the first 5 years, what we call the Nawaka period, where you're a new monk. Nawaka means like new. And you're under the guidance of a teacher who can train you, give you reflections, remind you what you have to do, explain to you how to practice, because you may not fully know. You may think you know, but you may not actually know. And there's a danger you may pick up wrong practices, bad habits, wrong views. So that the teacher's role is to try and guide you so you don't do that. And it needs a period of time, like 1 year is probably too short. 5 years is a reasonable chunk of time. So if you assess your practice over 5 years, you can probably see quite a few changes and see how your practice has been developing, what was working, what wasn't working, what you understand, what you still don't understand, if you're honest. So 5 years is a very good period of time to assess your practice and for the teacher to assess your practice. And after 5 years with a teacher, you then become what we call a Majjhima monk. So Majjhima means middle. We have this saying Majjhima Patipata, the middle way of practice, for describing the whole of the Buddhist practice. But a Majjhima monk is one who is between the period when they're new, a Navaka, and the period when they're a Thera, when they're a senior monk. So it's between 5 and 10 years as a monk. So it's a time where you already have a basis of understanding and practice. You're assumed to know the ropes, you've learned the basics, you can meditate, you can understand the philosophy, the background, the suttas, the rules of discipline. But you're still perfecting your practice. So usually it's considered a time where you're still not quite ripe to be a teacher. I mean, you can always share what you know with others. It's not you never teach, but you're still learning. But maybe you learn more, study with different teachers, travel a bit, go out on your own on retreat, maybe go on what we call tudong, wandering in the forest and so on. So it's a time where you're learning in new situations, not necessarily always right next to your teacher. And then by the time, and that's a 5-year period, so again it's a period of time where you can really learn and assess your practice over 5 years. You can see changes for the better, hopefully, and you can see improvements, and you maybe understand things better. You're a bit wiser, more peaceful than before, happier than before, we hope. And then you're a Thera. By the time you're 10 years as a monk, they call you a Thera. Then you are considered to be a teacher, can become a preceptor. How much you've attained and understood will vary from person to person, of course, but you're considered to have enough knowledge and skills that you're more reliable now. And you may become a teacher yourself. All depends on the person. And some people don't want to be teachers, they want to be hidden away in the background, and that's fine as well. But you see, 5 years is quite a useful period of time to assess your growth in the Dhamma. 5 years, 5 years, 5 years. Probably 1 or 2 years is too short, isn't it? A few months, very short. As lay people, we go on a 10-day retreat and we feel we've almost conquered the Dhamma and we're very close to Nibbana by the end of the retreat. Then you finish the retreat, you go home, and within a few weeks it's like, what happened? Back to square one, isn't it? So 10 days is not enough, 1 year is not enough. But 5 years, you're starting to, things can really come together. And Ajahn Chah used to say things like, people would come to him and say, oh, how long will it take for me to become a Sotapanna, stream enterer, back to labels. And he said, 5 years. Just stay in the road 5 years and you'll be a stream enterer already. Whether they are or not, it doesn't matter. He would say that. I think he was meaning it's a good enough time to get to understand how to practice, to establish right view, to understand what is wholesome, what is unwholesome, what is right, what is wrong, what is the path and what is not the path. 5 years is considered a good length of time to learn that. So it's like you're a Sotapanna, whether you're actually a Sotapanna or not, who knows? So he'd say things like that. Another question. Dear Lumpur, a quote, there is no jhana without wisdom. There is no wisdom without jhana. But for one with both jhana and wisdom, they are in the presence of Nibbana. That's from the Dhammapada. A very nice quote, a very useful one, because just pointing out the two main aspects of the practice. Jhana is samadhi, levels of stillness, ascending levels of stillness. This jhana is the 4 rupa jhanas, material jhana based on forms, such as the breath, for example, anapanasati. Breath obviously needs form, needs a body, needs an object based on the body. And of the 4 rupa jhanas, the 4th is the deepest, and is characterized by equanimity. Then there's the arupa jhanas, the formless jhanas based on very refined states, such as the state of infinite consciousness, infinite space, nothingness, and neither perception nor non-perception. But jhana alone is not enough to reach nibbana. And that's the whole point that separated the Buddha from the other teachers of his day in India and today as well. One also needs panya, wisdom. And so jhana practiced in Buddhism is what we call samma samadhi. And samma samadhi isn't practiced in isolation, it's practiced in association with the other seven factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. That's why we can put the word samma on the front of samadhi. If it's practiced with samma ditthi, it's a right view, which is wisdom, right thought, right intention, that's wisdom. Intention to renounce attachment to sensuality, the intention to renounce ill will and hatred. And it's practiced with right livelihood, right speech, right action, right effort, right mindfulness. So samma samadhi has a purpose, it has a role to support the arising of wisdom, panya, insight, true knowledge and vision of the way things are. And it works together with wisdom, and they reinforce each other, support each other. So with wisdom, jhana can arise, with jhana, wisdom can arise, or with panya or samadhi, samma samadhi can arise. Just pointing out the importance of cultivating both these qualities together. If you expand it a bit further, you get the 5 indriya, spiritual, or pala, 5 spiritual powers or 5 spiritual faculties, which includes sattha, virya, effort, sati, mindfulness, samadhi, and then panya. Ultimately, panya, wisdom, is what uproots defilement, true knowledge and vision of the way things are, seeing things as impermanent, suffering, not self, not to be clung to as self. But wisdom depends on jhana, samadhi. I always like the simile of the person going into the darkened room. The lights are not on, you go into the darkened room, it's very difficult to walk around a room that is dark. You go very slowly, you bump into things, you trip over things, you hit your head, you stub your toe. So you have to go very slowly and you feel your way. You can do it, you can walk around in that room, but it's not a very good way to do it, is it? Because you might knock things over and you won't really know exactly what's in the room. You grab something in the dark and you might think, oh, this is a table, and it might end up being a computer or something. You grab a cushion and then you find out later it was a person. So it's not a very good way to go around that room in the dark. Better to have light. So samadhi is like the light you turn on, or the candle you light, or the torch you turn on. So not only can you feel your way around the room, but you can see what's in there. And the depth of samadhi, the level of jhana, you might say, is like how bright your torch is, how bright your light is. So you can have a very dim light or a very small little candle, and that's enough. You can see around, but it's not ideal. You'll miss stuff. If you've got a little candle, there'll be something in the corner you don't notice because there's still shadows and there's darkness in parts of the room because the candle can't illuminate everything. But if you go in with a really big, powerful LED light, the latest torch from some shop or something you get online, brightens up the whole room, well, maybe you'll see everything clearly. It's like getting fourth jhana, or everything is so clear. So the mind of jhana is radiant, and that radiance illuminates, and that helps wisdom to penetrate and understand everything very clearly. So you can practice with just a little bit of samadhi, but it's not going to be so powerful or effective. Maybe it's slower. It's like the person moving around in a little bit dark, some light, some dark. It's going to take longer to know what's in the room and recognize everything and go about your business. Whereas if you have a bright, powerful light or floodlight, then you'll see everything very quickly. So, if you attain fourth jhana, you're going to get to nibbana very quickly. So they say one who has attained fourth jhana, Ajahn Chah said, Ajahn Chah did talk about jhana sometimes, and he said somebody who's attained jhana is very close to nibbana. Because, one, the Buddha said it, two, that stillness and luminosity of the mind helps you see and know things as they truly are, quickly and effectively. It's not nibbana, but it's very close. So the next question is, what wisdom is required for samadhi? And how do we develop it? Is this right view? Well, you take your samadhi and you investigate the Four Noble Truths. And as you investigate the Four Noble Truths, your practice of samadhi improves as well. It's reinforcing. So you think about it, when you're practicing meditation, why are you not peaceful? Because the five hindrances come up. 1 minute it's a bit of sensual desire, then some ill will, then some drowsiness and apathy, and then some worry and agitation, and then some skeptical doubt, and then back to sense desire, and it's like one after another. You need wisdom to work through the hindrances as much as you need effort and you need mindfulness. One way of describing samadhi is the continuous presence of wholesome dhammas. There's no unwholesome dhammas left in samadhi. If you've attained some samadhi, your mind is peaceful. The hindrances have gone, at least temporarily, briefly, or for a long time, but they've gone. That requires wisdom, but then it also facilitates more further wisdom, as it were. So wisdom is developing samadhi, and samadhi is supporting the development of wisdom. It's a back and forth thing, I think, for most people who could say exactly how much wisdom, how much samadhi one has put effort into developing over the years. Most people practice for years and years. And they're both developing. There may be times when one really focuses mostly on samadhi to make the mind very one-pointed still through mindfulness practice. But then there's time when one is maybe much more focused on cultivating wisdom and insight into the three characteristics. So one even investigates the nature of samadhi in light of the three characteristics. So you put all this effort into attaining samadhi, and then you hack it to pieces by seeing it as impermanent and not self. But that's done with the light of samadhi, the the stillness of samadhi. So it's not like you're losing anything, you're just seeing through samadhi, seeing that the factors of samadhi, the rapture, the bliss, the luminosity is not self. So on the one hand, wisdom is helping you develop samadhi. On the other hand, wisdom is also helping you let go of samadhi. Sounds contradictory, but as you practice, you realize you're constantly deepening your insight to penetrate through even the wholesome dhammas, the fruits of the practice that you're developing. You're also turning into food for vipassana and insight. So nothing is free, nothing is to be left untouched, no stone unturned. It's not like, I've got my samadhi now, all is done, and then you sit back, lean back on your armchair and do nothing. You can't, because you may attach to the bliss of samadhi, the luminosity, the radiance of it, the peace of it. You have to keep investigating and developing further wisdom. And wisdom can also be limited. You may think there's nothing I can't see as impermanent, not self. But then there'll be something you missed, and then one day it will come along and catch you out. So true wisdom is also always on its guard. It's always, as Ajahn Chah used to say, it's not sure. You think you're a Sotapanna, it's not sure. You think you're enlightened, it's not sure. You think you've attained fourth jhana, it's not sure. It's not to say you haven't, but you need that deepest wisdom of insight into impermanence just to keep you sane and make sure you're not deluding yourself. Last question. Thank you for regularly teaching Asubha Kammatthana. Can you talk about why Asubha Kammatthana brings up bad moods? Will these reduce over time? Metta can sometimes feel a very long way away. Thank you. Asubha means the unattractive, the unbeautiful. Focusing your mind on the perception of the unattractive, the unbeautiful, particularly with regards to the physical body, but not solely. You can also look for the Asubha in anything that you find attractive. So, a flower, a car, a piece of clothing, a building, whatever it is your mind is attracted to, you can look for the unattractive in that to help balance up your perceptions and reduce your attachment. And you're right, we are surrounded by a culture of sensuality. We're in the realm of sensuality, kama, vachara, loka. It's a sensual realm, so we love beautiful things. Everyone may have their own personal view of what is beautiful, but we're all attracted and love beautiful things. And so it's our body, someone else's body, it can be male, female, whatever. Everyone has their ideas and perceptions of attraction, and we're constantly thinking of it, pursuing it, seeking it, getting lost in it, getting attached to it, getting obsessed by it, indulging in it. No end, is there? It makes the world go round, basically. Lust brings you into the world and keeps you in the world and will bring you back again next time. So it really is the sort of fundamental defilement of the mind, the attachment to the body. So sexual desire is not the last defilement to be abandoned, but it's one of the last defilements to be abandoned. So the anagami, the non-returner, has abandoned all attachment to the body. So they've abandoned both greed and hatred based on attachment to the body. But the average person is, still plagued and caught up and bound up with lust and lustful thinking. So we need to develop Asubha, perception of the unattractive in the physical body, contemplate impermanence as well, until it's established, the new perception or the perception of the unattractive is established to counter the perception of the attractive, which pulls our mind all over the place. So, why would it lead to bad moods? Well, if you're not getting what you want, you know, say you have a lot of lust and then you start contemplating Asubha, developing the perception of the unattractive, the part of the mind that is used to getting what it wants, having lustful fantasies, lustful interaction with other people, the pleasure of that, will get annoyed, not getting what you want. And people do get annoyed, don't they, when they don't get what they want. They get frustrated, they get angry, they blame people, they get upset, they get depressed, get sad, all kinds of things. So if you're directly challenging your attachment to the body, your sexual desire, your own mind, that part of the mind that identifies with sexual desire and its objects, will fight back. No, I'm not ready to give up, you're not yet ready to renounce. And so you get great big fights going on. I remember one nun at Wat Nomapong, Ajahn Chah's monastery, saying, oh, she's had so many battles with lust, you know, so she's been rolling around with a battle of lust. Can be that bad. Physically, there's a kind of physical battle going on. Sometimes it's just mental, sometimes it's physical as well. And this isn't with anyone else involved, it's totally solo, private, working with your own kilesas. And sometimes it makes you grumpy if you're confronting your attachment to sexual desire, an attachment to the body and the beauty of the body, and then you're saying, no, it's not what you think it is. You know, part of your mind is not happy about that. So you get grumpy. You have to work with that. So that's why we cultivate metta, goodwill, friendliness, to help balance up the grumpiness, the anger of the mind that may be stirred by the practice of Asubha. One thing to remember though is if you're doing meditation on Asubha Kammatthana, developing the perception of the unattractiveness, so it could be the 32 parts of the body, the corpse meditation, the 4 elements, any of these kind of meditations, if your mindfulness becomes stronger and more continuous, the hindrances go quiet, and that includes the hindrance of ill will as well as lust. So you can actually overcome ill will and anger through practice of Asubha. The reason it might put us in a bad mood is because we haven't yet completed the course, as it were. We do a little bit of Asubha, but then the hindrances return, and then we get grumpy or angry. But if you really pursue it to the point where your mind becomes still and one-pointed, you won't be angry. You'll actually be very peaceful and full of metta, quite naturally, because your ill will has gone. And that's something people often forget because they haven't perfected the practice yet. But keep practicing Asubha, it will make you very peaceful, very pleasant to be with. If you know somebody who's developed Jhana based on the Asubha meditation, they're a very peaceful person to be with. They're not grumpy, they're not angry. But yes, we use metta to counteract this tendency towards grumpiness. You know, partly we get angry with ourselves for having attachments, for having defilements, and we've got to blame ourselves, why am I so attached? Especially if you're practicing a lot, you know, you get frustrated with when you see a defilement coming up. It's like, oh, why haven't I got rid of this yet? I've been practicing so long, so hard. So sometimes we get grumpy with ourselves, sometimes we get grumpy with the objects of our desire. So people can do that. They can come out and be angry with, say, they're attracted to a member of the opposite sex. They don't want to see them because they don't want lust. So they say, get away from me. It does happen. And not very often. It may be just a mental thing. You're just, oh, I don't want to look, and get angry not looking. Or occasionally it comes out in actual behaviour. And occasionally I've seen a monk say, get away from here, to a young lady perhaps, not because she's done anything wrong, but just because she's attractive and he's caught up in his own battle with lust. So these are all things we just have to learn from. Learn restraint, mindfulness, apply wisdom in the situation. But ultimately, you're bringing up the perception of Asubha, the unattractiveness of the body, to the point where the mind is fixed on it, focused on it, visualize it, can visualize one aspect of the unattractiveness of the body, maybe see the body as a skeleton, or see some part of the body, the organs, or just see the body as a pile of feces or something. All sounds a little bit far-fetched at first, but if you meditate on it, maybe it starts to become a reality. And it will help to subdue your own lust. It can even subdue someone else's lust. And so monks sometimes, and nuns, they encounter someone else who has lust for them, and they apply Asubha to deal with the problem. So someone else is attracted to you sexually, and you contemplate Asubha in their presence, and they maybe get the message and move away and leave you alone. It's happened before. So those are the questions for tonight. We'll leave it there.